Time. So for those of you who are tweeting tonight, please just use Hive Data hashtag or Twitter handle just to keep conversation going. The Hive Think Tank event is forum for thought leadership. We focus through our panel discussions and Hive talks on two themes. One is all things data and another one is entrepreneurship. These were just few of the speakers that were on the Hive stage in the past. Since our inception, we have had organized over 170 events. Our community is growing. We have over 8,000 people coming to our events. Thank you to all of you who are here with us for the first time, and thank you to all of you who are coming here on a regular basis. I see so many familiar faces. Thank you. So on the stage we had 220 speakers, and tonight we have 4 fantastic speakers as well. We'll learn more about them in a second. So next upcoming event is next week. So as you know, the Hive Think Tank events are almost organized on a weekly basis, almost every Wednesday, but this one's taking place on Thursday. On the computer vision, it's deep learning talk by Professor Jitendra Malik, and it's taking place at SAP in Palo Alto. Please just register if you have time and interested on our meetup page, the Hive Think Tank, as you did for this tonight's event. Few more events in the fall. All of them are listed on our meetup page on our website. Something from industrial cybersecurity or on machine on the it's computer. It's about autonomous robots as well, and deep learning and NLP in November. Without sponsors and without partners, many of our events wouldn't have happened, so we'd like to give a big shout out to all of them. Thanks again, Tibco. And all the Hive Think Tank events are brought to you by The Hive, or The Hive is from T.M. Ravi, Managing Director and founder of The Hive.
Thank you, Sasha. So the Hive is a funding entity, so we help co-create, fund, launch companies. There's a common theme to all of our companies, which is we leverage AI, machine learning data to drive sort of value and disruption across a variety of different areas. If you can, please do come to the talk next Thursday. So Jitendra Malik used to be head of the CS department, is a professor at UC Berkeley. So he's going to talk about deep learning and computer vision. We have a bunch of companies that are hiring. So Neva is providing automation for customer service and customer support management. Sensify basically leverages blockchain to provide device level security for IoT. And so if you are going to be tweeting today, please use the hashtag Hive Data. And so with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend Peter Christy. I've known Peter for quite a long time and worked closely with him. So he is currently with 451 Research as a research director. And before that, he was based right here in Los Altos at the Internet Research Group. Peter is sort of a unique combination of someone who's been an analyst and thought leader, but also before that, kind of an operating and kind of engineering executive sort of across various networking and system software companies. With that, I give you Peter Christy.
Great, thank you. I need that clicker. I think it's more than nearly 20 years ago when I met Ravi, and he had a fabulously interesting data center management system that unfortunately, like many things, didn't survive the dot-com collapse. So over time, he narrowed his ambitions down and found some really doable things and did very well. And I'm delighted to still be in touch. Let me see if I can. Why don't we seat the panelists? And this is the thing, if you guys could sit in the same order So I'm here, and that means Steve, Clay, and Sal. And I do that only because that will help you remember who they are. We'll just cheat that way.
Here we go.
All right. What I try, my goal, so tell me by all means if I'm failing to accomplish it. My goal is to, somebody's moving. My goal is to make this a good use of your time. So I do that by trying to minimize the redundancy in the discussions and keep answers prompt, provoke discussion between different panelists if I think they have different points of view. The goal is to have the time well spent, and at the end of it to have you all say, gee, that was useful, I'm glad I came, I learned something. And what that learning is will depend on who you are and what you want out of it. So fairly quickly in the process, I'm hoping that the questioning will turn from me to you, because in the end, you're the best people to collectively say what you're interested about in the topic. So I'm going to give an overview to just try and set context. I'm not going to try and explain this deeply. I just want to say here's a framework to think about it. Then the panelists will all introduce themselves and set their own company and activity in that context. So in that framework, here are three very interesting, very different companies, and it's important that you at least understand why they come at this necessarily from different ways. I have some questions to ask the panelists. I will continue to ask questions until hell freezes over, more or less, but I would prefer it if the audience grabs that away from me. So as time goes on, think about questions and feel free to interrupt us at any moment, because we're all professionals. You won't disturb our patter if you do that. I've worn my orange analyst shoes, so you'll know that I'm the panelist, the panel moderator, and not a member. None of them, they all followed my dress code, and none of them wore orange conflicting orange shoes. Happy to do that. All right. So some of you look old enough, the one in the front seat, to actually know what this is and have used it. Many people aren't. This is mysterious. I bring this up because this is the version of a floppy disk that was used when the Macintosh was introduced in 1984. And the important thing to understand is that its capacity was half a megabyte. And that turned out to be enough because the computer had a similar capacity. So if you had a program in this thing, and many of us learned how to program, you got the program on a couple of floppy disks, you loaded it into your machine, and that was it. And it was really exciting, although completely foreign compared to where we are now. So what's changed? Well, the first thing was, as the machines get bigger and you can talk about multiple people sharing a machine and you want to add applications, we added application programming interfaces. APIs were just a way in which a machine could call another machine, another program, rather than the program executing in the behest of its jobs or the users. And we could create additional things. If you want to know what's really changed under all of this, it's Moore's law. Computers have become unbelievably more powerful since 1984. So as time goes on and machines are more powerful, the programs get more capable, we want to do more things with them, and the need to do things like add interfaces grows. That's sort of the higher of it. And then how the network came to view. Back in the day, I mean, Apple Talk was wonderful. You could actually get Apple machines to talk to each other and do that by plugging in cables, which was sort of a miracle. And then we would get a LAN where you'd have multiple very similar machines on a local area network, and they could call each other. So all of a sudden APIs became remote procedure call questions. I'm running a program here, but I'd like to use a program there, and I have to invent how to do this. And then when you generalize, when you got to a routed network, for example, in a company, then all of a sudden you had machines of different types. You had a 360 mainframe that had one character set and one byte ordering. It's talking to a DEC somewhere else. You'd like to call back and forth, but you needed to put in these interfaces some way of normalizing those differences, marshalling things, doing things in a more abstract way. Security became an issue as networks grew. Performance became an issue because with the network you could put more load on a program. And then the internet occurs, and the internet is both gives you the opportunity or challenge of connecting anything to anything. So it couldn't be more different from the floppy disk or the LAN where everything was the same. Now it's any machine of any type of any vintage might want to talk to another. And we also have things like Metcalfe's law, just as more things connect to the network, there's a synergy of the fact they all operate together. Metcalfe's law, don't tell Bob, it isn't really a law, but it is a useful observation that you get a compounding effect. So the evolution of API technology, again, think of it as the context is the power of the programs changes, what we do with them changes, the network connectivity changes, all in dramatic ways. To begin with, it would be ad hoc. You just put up some interfaces and use them and see what happens. As I said, on the LAN, you got into things like remote procedure calls, which gave you an orderly mechanism underneath it. We invented the internet and invented things like web services, which started to formalize how some of the interfaces were. They declared what they would do. You could use them. The mechanism in between took care of changing data types and byte orderings. We went to RESTful, which just means as we understood the complexity of what we were trying to do, we had to put some amount of semantic order in it. If you let anything do anything to something else, it got complicated in the management, and we created the topic for today, which is as this has all evolved, we realize there's an important thing in the middle, which is the management of APIs, and that's what these companies do at Root, and we're going to talk about it. What does it mean to do API management? It's all these issues that come up when you're trying to get when you're trying to coordinate the activity of many programs with another. You have issues of security. I mean, do you know who's accessing you? Is it somebody you approve of, or is it a random hacker from the outside? Can you authenticate? Do you have adequate authentication that says you're using the rules of the owner of the system to define who uses it? Can you scale? We were talking earlier about early horror shows. People put APIs up, don't view it as a big problem, wake up one day and they're overwhelmed with use. What did you expect? Oh, well, what are you going to do now? How do you make these mechanisms scale? How do you do lifecycle management? It's just like programs. The APIs are a formal manifestation, so you better know when you create them, when you're in an operation, you better have an orderly way to withdraw them and shut them down. Accounting, I left off of this list, things like analytics. I mean, there's just a category, if you think about it, that if you're in the middle of all these interactions are things you need to do that the industry and these panelists have lived through, have gone through a number of iterations. The iterations are either foolish, youthful reinvention, that's always possible, or quite reasonably a reflection of the changing world we live in. The world today is so different from what it was. Tibco, being an owner of APIs, is very much nostalgic and deja vu, because Tibco years ago made a lot of money inventing the enterprise service bus and charging people to attach it and doing very high-speed interfaces on things like stock market brokers. And now, many years later, they're back in the API business, which is sort of similar and very different. So why do we use this? It's pretty easy to do it. If you are an application designer, your goal is to do less, do less for more. So if you look around in the world of the internet, you say, why would I have to write any code at all, given if there's all these services and assets and the like, why can't I just use that? The other side of it is if you have something of value, rather than keeping it to yourself, does it make sense to offer it to others and find a way of monetizing your investment? So both of those sides make sense just in simple terms. And then if you look at what the internet has done as a business, all of a sudden it requires companies to work together in different ways. We hear people talking about multi-company platforms. No company is probably big enough to move forward in IT by themselves. So in healthcare or transportation or what have you, you have consortia of companies that want to build a common platform, and so that's APIs from the beginning. So why you want to do this is not at all a mystery. It starts with the simple programming that has elements of a much bigger business play. So, but much is still uncertain, at least uncertain in my mind. These guys are the experts. I'm just the provocateur off on the side. But when I look at and see what's going on, we have things like the hyperscale providers, Amazon Web Services, and Azure. Does that make a difference? It seems to affect the complexity of what we're doing in an uncertain way, but it's probably worth thinking about what this does to API management. How does this relate to microservices and containers? Hot words. I delight in the fact that my prediction is most people that use these words, you can understand, you can predict how much they know by the inverse of the density they use it in the street. So the more it says containers, the chances are the less they really understand what a container is. Does AP management remain a distinct topic, or is this something that when we look around, because we have cloud orchestration or service management, it's because it's being sucked up into a bigger mechanism? And then the question, I think, of real relevance to you in here, which is, who really needs to know it? Why, maybe this stuff is fine, but it's irrelevant to you, and if at the end of the day we can explain to you why they're really selling or explaining to somebody else, that would be useful. I don't think it's true, but it's worth discussion. So, that's my brief, all-encompassing, explain the world. If that's all you wanted to know, you can get some more food, and I encourage you to sit and listen, because these guys are the experts in the topic. As I said, the first phase is that each person will introduce themselves as long or as briefly. We hope it's brief, but if they want to go long, what can I do? And try and set their company in the context of the broader ecology. And so, beginning, Steve.
Great, thank you very much.
Is your mic on?
Oh, that might not be. I switched it off just in case it was pulled in the reverb earlier. Okay. Okay. Great, I think that's an excellent summary, so thank you for the intro, and yeah, it's going to be an interesting discussion. So my name is Steven Willmott. I was the CEO and co-founder of 3Scale, which is one of the major API vendors. And we had about 700 customers worldwide in all sorts of different industries, from very large to very small companies. And some of those were doing hundreds of millions of API calls a day, some of them were doing in the thousands per day. And about 2 months ago, we became part of Red Hat. So we're now a Red Hat company. And it's been an interesting transition for us. There's obviously with products continuing, we're doing a lot more things. Red Hat's a huge company that we've fitted into and leverage a bunch of stuff from there. But I certainly, from an API perspective, I think there's been a lot of change in the time that 3Scale's been alive and around, and there will continue to be more change. So I love the summary you came up from the disk all the way. The way I like to think of it is that every iteration of sort of technology that creates an abstraction layer where you can wrap more stuff. On the one hand, you think, well, is that inefficient or not? But what you're trying to do is create a first-class entity out of something that you can address. So if you're used to writing code in C, then you have functions. And that's a very local, very tight binding. And as we've gone over the technology iterations, you become looser and looser in your binding, and you want to have more and more use out of those components. And especially when you get to APIs, you have less and less information about who might be using them. So some of our customers have completely public APIs where there's not even tracking and there's not even a token to know who the user is. And that goes all the way down to very tightly coupled systems. And so I think what APIs are the next evolution of, and very important in, is they allow companies to create these labeled, well-defined interfaces for many of the components in their world, some of which are external, some of which are internal. And API management just helps you navigate that complexity that you've got with all these different types of users and usages, and create a map of what's going on in your entity. It's amazing how many of our customers have all these components that they're there and they're doing incredibly important work, but no one really knows what the interface looks like. You'd have to go and look at the code in the clients to figure it out. And so I think that's the exciting thing, and we're almost just at the beginning of a lot of that. And yeah, I think I'm sure we'll get into some deep topics around it. But pretty much every company we see is doing something in APIs and is navigating this space in terms of their internal data and then the external connections they're trying to work on. So yeah, I'm gonna cut off there and polish onto clay.
Being acquired by Red Hat is interesting because Red Hat buys things that they think would contribute value to the community, and they're diligent about the community being all open source. So And when you're acquired by them, they kill your revenues and open source your product, which is an interesting transformation for some of the startups. But a remarkable company. Clay.
So I'm Clay Loveless. I am the former chief architect and co-founder of Mashery. And I was there for several years and left to do other things for a while, and then recently came back to now Tibco Mashery about 2 months ago. It's interesting the things that have changed. We started Mashery 10 years ago this past June, and it's a different world. So I think that, but again, like Steve said, we're really, in a lot of ways, we're just at the beginning, and we're now looking at what's the next generation of features that we're going to build out, and how do we leverage what we've learned in the last 10 years to drive us to help companies do cool things for the next 10. So it's good to be back.
Sai.
Sai Koppala. I drive product marketing at Apigee, one of the API management vendors in this space. I'll give a little bit of the business perspective. People have...
Is your mic on?
Sorry.
Oh.
The culprit.
Can we turn the audio? Can you just turn it down a little bit, I think?
Or maybe the audio.
Most technical people have used APIs in the past. The key is what's happening if you look in the last few years. Pretty much every industry is...
Is he the guilty one?
Hello?
So pretty much every industry is getting disrupted by software. And underlying that, businesses are realizing actually the value of API. It's along two dimensions, I would say. The two typical use cases we see among customers. One is especially relevant to large incumbents who are now trying to compete more effectively in the digital space. And they are transforming themselves digitally, and they realize APIs are critical to them. Because at the end of the day, they are trying to come up with new digital experiences for the customer faster. And they have a set of legacy systems and data and different sources, and how can you quickly deliver the digital experiences faster? And they realize APIs is a key component of it. So that's one set of folks trying to do that. On the other end, you have both large and small companies are realizing that the way to competing today is how can I expand my market reach or market presence, either through my partners or being part of a larger ecosystem. Once again, in the digital ecosystem, APIs are the way to do it. So those are the two reasons we see more and more companies saying, hey, I know the value of APIs from a business perspective. Now, how do I secure my APIs? How do I scale my APIs? Because a lot of the systems were built pre-mobile days. They're used to hundreds of thousands of transactions, but not billions of calls coming in a day. So how do I scale my APIs? How do I, now, if you're going to have an API, then you can only be as successful as you have visibility into it. So what is how performant is my API, or how is it being used, so the analytics behind it. So those are the reasons why we see more and more customers adopting an API management solution.
So, a hot topic, one of my favorite fuzzy topics is service-oriented architectures, but it makes sense that you start building things by integrating services. Is that the same as API management, or if not, how would you draw a line that says, no, this is API management and this is sort of service orchestration?
I think they are very related. In a lot of ways, it's the iteration. It's reusable components, and there are means to connect them. I think there are two sort of philosophical differences, which maybe we all need to just turn these off. Use the hand mic. So I think there are two sort of major philosophical differences. The way a lot of what SOA turned into, you ended up with a lot of one-to-one integrations, so very tight coupling. And so it's almost like That's the configuration method. I configure absolutely everything about the interface, and I have full flexibility in doing that, but I've defined what I want, and anyone can integrate with it. But it ends up being very specific. So a lot of what happened with REST APIs is a lot more convention, right? A lot more standard conventions which people can pick up and that are pretty much always the same across multiple APIs, and that creates a lot more fluidity and reusability. It creates some problems as well. The bindings aren't as tight sometimes. It creates errors and problems. But that's a pretty big change. And a lot of what SOA also became, it definitely, so ESBs became kind of the standard instantiation. That's sort of the smart pipe model. So there's a lot of intelligence in the integration between all of these services, a lot of brains in the middle, if you like, and the endpoints end up being not that smart. Whereas with APIs, you're sort of almost at the opposite end of the spectrum. You have all these kind of smart endpoints with defined interfaces that pretty much anyone can talk to, but there's not much brain in the middle. Now, you need both of those in a lot of companies, a lot of infrastructures. In both cases, you want a well-defined definition of the endpoint. So I think what APIs have done is move that borderline a bit. And the other thing is the expectation for APIs is you almost should be thinking of that there are external people talking to that. They may be contractors, they may be customers, they may be other departments, but they're certainly not people that co-wrote the code of the backend. And so I think that's kind of the opening step that's happened, and it's a continuum, not a hard definition.
So to your question about the cloud orchestration versus API management, I think that there's definitely an overlap between them, but I look at cloud orchestration as it's really a scaling exercise. It's something about how do I become highly available and reliable. Whereas API management, at the very base, is what we always talked about. It was we do all the boring stuff so that you don't have to. There's a certain table stakes, for lack of a better term, the entry-level stuff that anybody who's providing an API for real needs to have. It's understanding who the users are, understanding authorization as well as authentication and reporting and high availability and caching, et cetera, and so yeah, you got to have cloud orchestration in order to get the scale that provides that kind of value, but that's really where a lot of the overlap ends, I think.
You don't have to. So, there's one or two follow-up questions. When you were describing you could be an analyst, by the way. Said lots of stuff. It sounded good at the end. Saying, what exactly do you say?
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, it is. Anyone being an analyst is always a compliment. But are APIs subordinate, conceptually subordinate to services, or services subordinate? Is one viewable as the piece of the other, or are they just different? I mean, what you said was they had some overlap, but is there, if you're anal and you want to write them all on one chart, is there some way you draw them with respect to each other?
I can take another crack at it. SOA it's more principles, right? So people combine SOA with ESB with integration all in the same way, because way back when we started, the main business purpose of it was reuse and kind of providing it's a horizontal integration across my system.
SOA being service-oriented.
Service-oriented architecture. So a lot of the use case, most of the case there was, how can I really drive reuse? That was the focus. Now APIs is a way to call that service, but API management is much more focused on consumption of these services. So the focus is shifted. It's not as much about, of course you want to reuse, but the focus is much more, how can I provide agility and drive consumption of this API. So that's why you see a lot of the API management vendors. We have things like Developer Portal, where you can come and look at the APIs, discover your APIs, do the interactive documentation, request response. So all the features that a lot of the vendors here have built is more about how can you make it easy to consume APIs. Whereas in the back, if you look at ESB, the focus is much more on integration.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think to tap my inner analyst, I think I would say that there's the...
Orange shoes next.
Exactly, I have them in my bag. I think technically these things are extremely similar. I mean, there's no reason why you don't have a SOAP API, right? A SOAP API is a perfectly valid API, just like a REST API, or a streaming API or anything else. It's an endpoint. I think the key difference that I would say is, if you look at SOA, service-oriented architecture, it kind of gives you the clue that there is an overarching design to the system that is built in a service-oriented way. So someone has started thinking about reusable components, but there is sort of a team or a set of teams behind the design of the overall system. Whereas APIs, I see it as the other end of the spectrum in terms of it isn't much more we're building a bunch of components or we're componentizing a lot of things that we have to create the toolbox to create new things. So technically, it doesn't really matter what technology you're using in a lot of ways. There's better and worse suited for certain use cases. But the mindset is a bit different in that service-oriented architectures typically, what we see, are a lot more tightly bound for one or several applications or use cases, whereas APIs tend to be more open-ended and each get random and strange uses.
So APIs are, whether or not you thought about it now that you're doing it, I was fascinated by the earlier comment just because I hadn't thought about it, which was API management as a way of discovering what your software does, which I'm sure for many companies is a real epiphany. Oh, that's what's driving it all. So here's an early, but not the last, have you stopped beating your wife question. Why do we need multiple companies? I mean, is there a reason why different variants, or should you guys just all agree on a mega merger and contribute the stuff to open source and be done with it? Or why
Go home. We're doing that.
Two of you are doing it, right? Yeah.
So you guys are open sourcing everything?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a zero-sum game. We're in the early days of API management. Only now you see more and more companies realizing, hey, there's actually business value APIs, and these are my assets. I need to secure them, all those things I talked about. So the market is growing fast. There's plenty of room for all of us. Now, what happens 10 years down the road, nobody knows, right? But I don't think that's an issue. It's not a zero-sum game at this point.
So it's
We
innovation.
compete against each other indeed. So.
Well, let me refine it on if you look just at, suppose you believe, like I like to provocatively state that amazing amount of stuff is going to go to AWS or Azure. Do you guys exist on AWS or Azure, or does that functionality become part of the platform and you're out of it?
Well, I don't know, for the Mastery product, I mean, we built on AWS from the beginning, and we're now migrating out to some other cloud providers as well. But I think that what happens now, it's funny what you were saying at the beginning of the phrases or the lingo that gets dropped. The more often it gets dropped, the less people may know about it. The cloud is one of those words that's kind of disappeared, and I think that as a result of that, now the cloud providers like AWS and Azure and Google, they're really disappearing into the background, as they should. I think that in a lot of cases, we have some customers who, Mastery customers who are large retailers themselves, who've had some concerns. Well, there's a competitor under the hood there somewhere, and now that AWS is so successful and is really clearly a separate thing from Amazon retail, we're finding that less often. But it's just how you do stuff now. So I don't think that
AWS has a set of API management, which I presume you would describe as nascent and immature and amateurish or whatever, but not as mature as what you offer. But over time, I assume they'll get better because they're pretty good at that. As the native functionality that integrates well with everything else is developed, is there still a role for additional API management systems running on? I'm talking, when I say on AWS, I mean for code that's running on AWS, not as a SaaS platform.
if a company has everything running on AWS, and their needs are limited in terms of API management, we'll all agree that what they have right now is nascent. Maybe AWS will, or a gateway will work for them. The reality is, all our customers have applications, legacy applications sitting in private data centers, different clouds, and you need to have, if you want to unify API management across these things, you'll be talking to one of the API management vendors.
Yeah, I think so. I think there is definitely value in different companies. Each of our companies has taken a different route to actually building the technology. I remember when I found out how Mastery worked, I was like, wow, we never thought of that. It was actually a different way of doing it. I actually think our way worked better for the type of customer that we have. But it was interesting to see when these things were happening. This is way back in 2007, 2008. So one of the things that 3Scale did is that from the very beginning, we separated the management layer, the sort of policy management, analytics, and all of that into one component. And we were agnostic about the gateways that controlled traffic flow. So we integrated with Nginx, with Varnish, with Akamai, with a whole bunch of different ways of delivering the data itself, which would act as the actual agents to enforce the rules about APIs. And so when the Amazon gateway came out, for example, we integrated with it immediately because it's just another delivery mechanism. So we see that we see a kind of hybrid world emerging, and I agree with the statement just now, which is that a lot of people have workloads in different places on different clouds. And if you think of an API management kind of a problem for a company, you want to see all your APIs in all the different places, wherever the gateways or the traffic is flowing. And so I think that's kind of the way we did it. It was different from some of the other ways, and frankly, our technology was a little bit harder to adopt at the beginning. But on the other hand, now I think with microservices, it's kind of shown that this is a nice way of doing things. Both Mastery and Apigee have much more developed, I would say, gateway products, which do a lot more clever stuff on the traffic flow, which we don't have. One of these they should integrate with the Mastery and the Apigee gateway, and then that'll have your merger.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to say about, regarding the AWS API gateway, and there's also IBM's Strong Loop has an API gateway kind of off the shelf, and those are great ways to start. I think that they are, they're at our beginning, really. I mean, there are a lot of those things look like the first version of any of our products. As far as I'm concerned now, I mean, what we've really learned over the last 10 years is that the API management part starts after that. It's really, once it's running, once you can see how does your API behave, what kind of spikes do you see as, for one of our customers is Starbucks, and as you follow the sun and follow the caffeine requirements of people around the globe, then what does that do to latency and usage overall? And so that's really where we like to look at that's the value that we add over and above, hey, go build it yourself on AWS. It's really apples and oranges at that point.
By the way, just as a random piece of endless pontification, I believe that we repeatedly see that visibility is more important than anticipated. When optimization was put in was usually because somebody had a communication problem, and then the side effect of putting intelligence on the line is the company learned for the first time what the traffic was actually on the line. So companies like Packeteer in the end said that 80% of the value they delivered to their customers. And I think I hope it's clear that that's a real value here, that if it doesn't do anything other than telling you how your software is being used, and I would imagine for most customers that don't have tools to do that, it's a complete eye-opener. Like, oh shit, is that really this? Oh my God.
And who is that?
Yeah, what? Right.
Who is that user?
So, are you thinking about questions? Oh, we have a question. We have two. Let's start. Let the fun begin.
So I think...
Could you just identify who you are to give some brief context?
I'm Santana Krishnasamy. I'm with an CPaaS company called Candid.io. So we are a real-time communication company providing APIs, SAPs, and SDK. So I think a question to you to start with, and then maybe the panel can address this. Just from your point of view, the API management space, just giving some context, what's the market size today and where do you see in 5 years it will be? Just in it's we're talking about billions or multiples of billions. Okay. The reason why I'm asking is, you made a comment saying that hey, you guys ought to be one platform. In fact, my question is actually it should be the other way. Why I don't see that many new startup companies coming in the API management space. As a pure play companies. There's Azure is doing, AWS is doing, it's fine. So on the other hand, you see a lot of companies becoming software companies. Plenty of companies, whether in the AI space, NLP or bots, every one of them are doing APIs. So definitely there is a need for API management. Either a lot of them are coming to these gentlemen here and buying, they're doing a very good business here, or maybe the other option is, they're going with open source way. So maybe panel can take a crack.
Let me give you a hand wave commentary, and then I'm going to ask these guys to actually talk about the market size, because they actually know the numbers far better than we do. There's something really interesting going on that has to do with open source. And what's interesting about open source has nothing to do with open source. Dave Mayer, who's now at Brocade, made exactly the right comment. In the networking business, open source isn't about what you build, but how you build it. And across a broad swath of the industry, you see companies realizing that maintaining the code that they develop themselves doesn't make sense, that they get better lifecycle management. It's not a question of trying to get rid of it or creating a business. It just says there's so little software that you're really interested in, you can find a better way of managing the rest of it so you don't have to maintain it all only for your benefit. It makes sense. So Red Hat is a really interesting company, strange business model, but they're really the experts in helping people to understand this notion of community development. And as that occurs, as people decide they really need to cast their software into a broader community for very good reasons, then all of a sudden the issues of API management crop up because other people will want to use it. So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff going on now that creates the kind of question that you raised. Can I turn back to you? If you guys had to guess as to is there a well-defined API management, and roughly what are the annual revenues for it today? And is it growing?
I'm not sure. Well, there's a rival analyst organization beginning with an F, and they do have a market size report for API management.
But this is how analyst companies do it. What you do is you ask all the companies independently, you write something that is sort of what they said, and then whichever ones are understood complain and want to do it, you let them scream at each other, and then at the end, when the screaming is uniform, you publish it as a report. So we're making sausage right in front of the audience. We can do this in real time.
Yeah. So I think that report puts it at somewhat a little bit under $1 billion right now. So, and then I can tell you how that's made up. I mean, there are obviously some larger vendors, some on stage here, but also a lot of companies spend a lot of dollars doing this themselves. So the amount of actual API management code that we see in customers is really significant. So people are doing these things, and the system grows over time, and it covers some of their APIs, but not all of them. And so the amount of effort actually going into that is very large. And if you think about what API management is, it's an enabling technology. And so when do people buy it? Well, they buy it most of the time, when they want to do something new. So often it's a product group that wants to do something new. They want to launch a bunch of new apps. They want to start a partner program. And there's normally significant funding for those initiatives. And then IT comes along and says, we're going to take a bit of that pie and we're going to do some house cleaning. And so the market for that house cleaning, you would be surprised how large it is overall, right? And as we talked about cycles, every 5 years, there's a change. I mean, if you just take API management now, the Forrester report says it's a little bit less than $1 billion, the market in total. I don't know what the growth forecast is. I think that's certainly substantiated by the revenues of the companies here and the others. And there are 20-25 vendors, if you count various types of open source. And
So growing single digits, double digits?
I said it's double-digit growth. Now, what happens in 10 years? Does it get compacted into other things? Does it become a standard thing you have everywhere? That's a little bit hard to tell. But, you know, we see the market that pretty much every major infrastructure vendor, middleware vendor, wants to have a product in this space and needs to have a product in this space.
So to answer the question as to why then aren't there more entrants, is that just because it's a big market and the people that you would compete with if you're a new entrant are some big providers that have revenues to pay for development, or is there another reason why there aren't more new start entrants? And if you want to debate the market size, that's fine as well.
So I echo Steve's point. When it's $1 billion, we see that our number one competition in most cases is actually in-house. Some team has decided, hey, I just need to expose this one API. You know what I can do it on my own, let me get an Nginx server, X, Y, and Z. Where we see the market moving to is the business realizing it's actually a strategic asset. And I don't want 30 different gateways sitting across my enterprise. I'd rather have, it's a strategic asset, API is a business asset for me now. And that's when they say, okay, I'm going to make this big API management purchase. That's what we see. So to date, at least, quite a bit of it, maybe you guys can go make, especially since you guys have been in the industry much longer, in-house is still a big player that's going to get bullets on our own. What they don't realize is once they start building, like you said, once they have a gateway, there's a whole bunch of other things you need to do. But if it's one application, I can survive with it. But when it becomes multiple applications across different organizations, then that's when the complexity gets.
So two pieces of real wisdom is, number one, you can't underestimate the importance of big initiatives to drive new technology. It's really hard to grind new technology in the day-to-day humdrum. 80% of your budget is for maintenance, but you can't get your arms around it. So an amazing amount of new stuff goes in because it fits into some higher level CXO visible initiative. That's just wisdom if you're trying to do technology insertion. I think the other thing is this, getting the basic tool in and starting to understand the mess that's there is great for precipitating a decision to do more of it. I mean, there's no better way to convince management than you to put things under better control and show them what a mess it is. So if you can find a way of putting your nose into the tent and exposing the complexity of what goes on, it's probably a really great way to sell how to do it better as well. At least that would be my guess.
I think that one of the things about why we're not seeing more companies get into it, it's harder than it looks. It's you know, if you look at it from the standpoint, well, I like to think about it, I had to explain this to somebody recently about, it's kind of like Tetris. At the beginning, it's like, oh yeah, the blocks are coming down, and I'll put this one right here, and then they start coming a little faster, and then they start coming a little faster, and then they come at 1 billion a day. And so it's simple, but it's not easy. So if you look at, you know, again, a Starbucks example, if I've got people around the world trying to buy coffee with their app, when is it okay for me to be down? Never. So we have to be better than, we have to be more available than any of our customers. Because I might have one that, yeah, okay, these guys they're gonna have a planned outage, or they can afford to have a planned outage, but in a multi-tenant environment, I can't ask them all to do that. So I have to never go down. And we all want to never go down. Doesn't always work that way, but it's, you know, that I think is, and we look out 5 years, when you get to IoT and more mobile apps and connected cars and everything else, it's going to become, it's kind of, if you really look at it, it's daunting now. It's just terrifying if you look out 5 years. So I think that that's going to continue to keep the big players down, and the new ones that start, good luck for them. it's hard. So I think a lot of them will wash out once they start to understand how hard is it really.
Yeah, and by the way, another piece of analyst pontification is, and you see this, for example, as people put network functionality up into the cloud, is if you give an enterprise network team the ability to replicate what they've done in the cloud, they can do it, and it's really stupid because you have hot standby redundancy. When you move technology into the cloud, and you have you have the requirement to make it highly available, but you have a whole different set of tools to do it. So how you do that when you have multiple entities, how you do scale within the entities, how you keep the different clouds all synchronized. Fortunately, you don't have to invent that all from scratch because the big hyperscale providers have done a lot of the pioneering work. But should you want to get into the space and provide something and aim it at the cloud, don't do it the way it was. If you're Tibco, don't do it the way they did it when they had ESPs doing market feeds 20 years ago, because it'll end up being really stupid. There's a question here.
Yes. Vidyut Paruk, CTO of Interface ED, a healthcare IT company. So I kind of have a related and somewhat of an opposite question, which is, if you think about AWS with its Lambda function and gateway, you can pretty much do what you're talking of. You can essentially have something which will scale infinitely on demand and will never come down. And combine that with somebody like API, which will provide me good documentation. I've got my solution. Why do I need you?
So who doesn't know what Lambda is on AWS? Anyone? Great, just go back and learn about it. Because people talk about serverless programming, it's a way of dealing, 80% of an application are the exceptions. And Lambda is a really cool way of packaging all the exceptions into trigger rules, followed by the execution of a little snippet of code. So if you want to see something mind-twisting that says why AWS is doing interesting things, I would put Lambda right on the top of the list. And if you don't know about it, go and learn about it, because it's cool.
Yeah, the thing about Lambda I think is interesting is it's not all that different than Google's App Engine, which back in the day we thought, that's a toy. We couldn't build anything on top of it, because when you go to an enterprise customer and you say, they ask you, okay, well, so when everybody shows up for coffee, or everybody decides they're going to watch a video right now, how are you going to scale? And you say, no, it's magic. Don't worry, that doesn't fly. We tried that, and they won't buy it. So that's the challenge. If you're building it yourself, then what you're talking about in terms of Lambda function and the AWS gateway is a good start. But in terms of what we have, what all of these guys have done in terms of the API management space and what happens, the insight that you can get into how your API is used, the reporting capabilities, the things about API key issuance and throttling and those kinds of things, you can build it yourself. And as we've already covered, that's the biggest competitor we all have. We all come up in the sales conversations, but it's really the guys inside who say, no, we'll do that ourselves. That's the biggest competition. I think that in most of those cases, or in a lot of those cases, we get customers, and I know you guys have too, that they hit a ceiling where they say, wait a second, this is not our core competency, this is not we don't make our money doing this. We have value to add after all of this, and how many resources do we want to spend reinventing what you can get off the shelf from any of these guys or any of the others?
Actually, I think, so we integrate with AWS Gateway and Lambda, and you can do an enormous amount of things with that. I actually think it's awesome. I mean, there's so many, and Apiary is a great tool as well. There's a lot of great tools right now that do different parts of the stack. And that's actually a very, very healthy thing. because everybody has different problems, and you want to pick these different things and stitch them together, and you want to use them when they're appropriate. So why does the world need you question is, well, which part of the world needs you is really the question you need to ask, right? And so kind of examples, I'm sure these guys have them as well. If you think about, so some of our biggest customers, they have calls all over the world. They have probably 9 or 10 different internal teams with hundreds of developers in each of them. They have external partners, and each of those sets of people has different sets of access to different sets of APIs. And they can see what that traffic is on each of them. Hey, this API is suddenly getting less traffic. Why is that? Is the API messed up? Are the clients messed up? What's going on? And that visibility across all different types of infrastructure and all different APIs is super hard to get if you build it yourself. Now, you could do that. And you could stitch various pieces of open source together to do it, but it is very tough to do. And that, I think people think of API management as kind of the throttling part or the analytics, but actually the way I see it is it's really getting the technical layer connected with the business layer, which is who is doing what, at what time, and why. And that value add is still quite far away from most of the other platforms that are not sort of specialized in this.
You could definitely be an analyst.
I need to go write some code. Hang on.
Look, I echo these guys. Many of you have, I'm sure, in startups or you look at the market from far away. It's like a pretty simple thing to do. We spent, 300, 400 man years building this stuff. So, yeah, sure, you can build it, but, you can build anything, really. The question is, what's the focus here? How fast do you want to get to market? There's lots of functionality in this that needs to be built. You're just scratching the surface, which is probably AWS Gateway. So it totally depends on where you guys are in the journey and what you're trying to get out of APIs. And in terms of, you can check out pricing. People bring up AWS saying versus pricing, but actually look at a lot of vendors right now. It's pretty competitive.
Hey, Ravi, how long do you want to continue this part of it?
Let's see if there are any other questions.
Well, we have more questions. I was just saying, do you have a...
No, we can go till 8 o'clock. Yeah.
Work it.
Great panel. You touched on a little bit, but I'm interested.
Identify yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry, Hunter Whitney. You touched on it a little bit, I think, particularly analysts talk, right? But the human side of the API management, and I'm kind of interested in a little bit more of the opportunities and challenges, like making sure that people across an organization understand all kinds of things, like what's available in the API world, with the APIs they have, what's fresh, what's stale, what's security things, who's making the calls, all those kind of things. So there are examples to look to for tools that help expose this and make it more sort of democratized, for lack of a better term.
Or if you have anecdotal memories of where this turned out to be a really important thing with a customer, that would probably be good.
MapQuest is one of our customers. So they're mapping software, and their business has been taking their mapping API and geocoding API to enterprises, and they'll use it for mapping functionality. Now, that's a classic example where they want to make money from every API call. They have hundreds of customers. Initially, it was very manual, but then they realized they actually have 20,000 active developers using it. How do you sell them in a self-service way? So API management is more about consumption. That's where the biggest value is. And what I mean by that is, how can I get 20,000 or 100,000 developers to easily discover my APIs, try out my APIs, self-register, get an app key, and get going. And that's the critical part, right? So, and then I want to see what APIs are getting most used, and what is the performance of those APIs, or who are my most profitable customers from a usage perspective. So these guys now say, you know what, I want to create different tiers. It's the same API, by the way, but then they create different tiers in a silver level, let's say. They'll say, well, we're going to charge you X cents per 100,000 calls, but you can only call us at a given point 10 concurrent calls. Or if you're gold, we'll give you 100 concurrent calls, you can call us globally. So think of it almost APIs becomes a product for you. And how do you make it easy to consume, and now security comes along with it anyway, but that's where a lot of interesting use cases are. Another example would be TomTom. They, once again, similar example, they actually provide a lot of mapping for Uber outside of the United States. So every call that goes to that essentially goes through Apigee gateway.
Regarding the human element of it, there got two quick stories. One is about what is it that the API management providers can do that you can't get off the shelf. One of the things that just two sub features of Mastery. One's called Call Inspector, and one is called API Packager, which is two things where the back end, your engineering shop or the internal API we've been using for years, now we're opening the door. Well, okay, but we want to control that, or we want to put tiers around it, and so that's a tool that we have that can just lay on top of the API that exists. If you have, you're trying to debug calls, we can capture payloads that came in and that from the developer making the call, as well as the response that we got back from the server, since we sit in the middle. So there's a lot of real-time debugging kind of stuff that we can do, and we can help with our customers with that. The story, we had a customer, this was a long time ago, they had developed an API that was great, everybody's excited, deployed all over. I don't want to say who or where, but just imagine in roughly every household in the United States, okay? And not necessarily everybody was using it, but it was available to them in the house. And once people started using it, man, this API is really chatty. And to build an interface, I got to do 6 or 8 round trips, and this thing is taking forever. What are we going to do? And we saw that, and they saw that, and we were able to jump in and say, hey, in that case, it was, the API was not a revenue generator itself. It was just a channel to access what the real value was. And so we were able to say, don't worry about it. We came up with an aggregation call where they could stack these requests, send them out to us. We would then make them in parallel and send the result back as a bundle, and they just had to update their documentation for that. So that's something that, especially when it's not a revenue center, that an API management partner may be able to help you solve a crisis without you having to do much of anything.
Those are great examples. I love this question. So I think, as an industry, we're really terrible at the human factors part. So I think we've gotten good. We've gotten good at what you might term developer experience, right? Creating the right environment for someone who's a software developer to explore and figure out the API and use it. And there's actually a billboard which you see a lot around San Francisco, which gives me very mixed feelings. So it's a Twilio billboard, you've probably seen.
Yes.
It says, talk to your developer. How does that make you feel? Well, it's kind of cool because it's an API company and they're IPO'd and all those things, but then you realize that what it's saying is that their product is only available to developers, right? And I think there's a huge thing that's being missed. And it's very, very hard to actually get the API or the results of the APIs into the hands of ordinary users. And for me, it's a critical thing that has to happen because the power of API, an API can get you a book sent in one call. It can do so many things in so many different contexts. So getting that into the power of more ordinary users is a huge deal. One way that we see customers doing that we partially help with, but mostly it's the customer that takes the initiative is there's sort of a religious war around SDKs and those kind of integrations. So we have a customer called SimilarWeb, which is like not that many people know them, but they're actually a very large database of website data. So like the Amazon Alexa, not the talkative Alexa, but the previous Alexa. I don't know why they didn't have a different brand name, but anyway. So they had an API, got a lot of use, but it wasn't taking off as much as they wanted. And so then they started creating integrations with all sorts of different things and small packages. And one of the ones they did was Excel. It's like, wow, integrate with Excel, jeez. But that is now like 80-something% of their traffic, those SDKs. There are companies like Blockspring, which allow you as an API provider to create little snippets to go into Google Docs. Suddenly you've got a whole bunch of different users in the org that can get the data out of these APIs and do stuff. And they'll be ringing you up and saying, why does this thing not give me this data as well? Right? So the change that we could affect by that is huge. It is often very bespoke to the API. It's still hard. There aren't great tools. But I'm hopeful that some of the standards, like Swagger and Open API Initiative and those things start to make the tooling just a bit better and more interactive. We're still super early, and we're going to get a D- right now for enabling broad usage of APIs. That's my opinion.
So great question. You definitely could be an analyst.
Thanks.
Here.
Yeah, so I'm David Pluto with SAP, and what my question is what's next? So Clay, you touched on IoT a little bit, but if you could tell us kind of what's the next big topic within API management, and fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, something like that.
He could definitely be an analyst too.
Unfortunately, I don't know. But where I see things going, and the kind of questions that we're asked a lot is related to streaming APIs. Right now, there aren't.
Define streaming API.
Well, so either really more like a WebSocket kind of an API, so that you've got the connection stays open all the time. You're not. What we do today, I think what we all do now is based on the request is made, the response is sent, end of story. Whatever policies there were applied to that request, and now we start over. Whereas when you talk about a socket connection that stays open, where there's chit-chat back and forth in small messages, well, okay, where do we put the API management and the policy layers and the reporting and all that stuff around those? And so we're seeing a lot of requests for that sort of thing, and we're working towards rolling that out as soon as we can. Beyond that, I don't know. There's so many things that can happen, and what are the things that we would look at today and say, I don't know. You look at every car has a connection nowadays that you go buy a new car, and it seemed like that was a good idea years and years ago, but somebody had to go do it. And so what will people go and do, and how will they combine this stuff? I think that's where we're going to see it a lot, is more in the service-to-service types of management, so that rather than, as you get services that are bundled on top of each other, you get, you go back as far as Zynga or things that are a company that's built on top of another platform, that there's an API management layer between them in an interconnected stack of services. We're going to start seeing more of that sort of thing as well.
Couple of things. He's already covered the IoT part. What we're seeing from our customers is increasingly they're adopting data sitting, their application sitting in different clouds, as well as PaaS solutions like a PCF. So when you're talking about API management, you need distributed runtimes. So basically, this is kind of what we talked about earlier. So the gateway should sit where the application is sitting, whereas you're managing everything from a central perspective. So that's increasingly getting adopted. Security is equally important. What's happening is increasingly the attacks are at the API or the application level, even more very sophisticated attacks. So Apigee does a lot around bot detection and prevention. So we actually can analyze our traffic that's going through our cloud, billions of calls that go through our cloud, and then figure out patterns to say what is a potential bad bot attack, and then either we block it or mark it for honeypotting and different techniques. So that's another dimension. So this is, I'm talking literally what we're seeing now with our customers, right? So 4 or 5 years, things moving so fast. We're just trying to look at the next year.
I think these are definitely things that we see as well. Streaming APIs are becoming a lot more popular. There's a couple of sort of side ones, so I'm going to drop the microservices word just once. So the reason I'm doing that though is that I do think that there's a lot more. There's a clear move also from the IT infrastructure point of view of breaking up systems. Now, often it turns out to be a spectacularly bad thing to do because the complexity has to move somewhere. So if you break something apart, that means you've got a routing and coordination complexity rather than a monolith complexity which you had before. But I do think that changes the way APIs are used because you're going to have a lot more of them and you know, often now what we see is tens of APIs. It's going to be thousands. So that's a big difference. Another thing that's, I think, pretty critical is the connection with identity services. In a lot of previous iterations of integration technology, the identity of the users and all of these things were kind of in the system, but they weren't very explicit. So pretty much now, every customer we have, we're integrating with Auth0 or with Ping Identity or with Keycloak, which is Red Hat technology. There are all these different identity providers, and that's been the case for a while. But I see it, you know, you're going to have identity of the user, of the device, of the developer of the software, of the endpoint, and probably a couple of other things. That tuple of identities is going to determine what rights someone has, and I think that growth of that is going to be a real head scratcher in a lot of technological ways, but it will be pretty amazing, kind of the differentiation granularity you can get. So those are two things where I think, you know, the kind of sleepers that'll have a big effect.
So since this is a Hive event, let's shamelessly suck up to Ravi, but it's an interesting question that comes to mind. What's the possibility or probability that machine learning of all this data stream you're generating out of API management will turn out to be important? It would seem to me it's likely to be important now in the security aspects. Do you think there are other areas where that's going to end up being an important tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that we're starting to look at is the idea of predictive analytics. So we can say, hey, you know, based on what we have observed, you know, it's coming up to be Thursday, so you need to, you know, scale up a half hour earlier than this point of hotspot traffic. So instead of auto-scaling that we have today, which is reactive, we can then say, oh, hey, you know, this keeps happening, so let's do this. And so those are just, I mean, that's the lowest hanging fruit that I can see, but a big one when it comes to scaling and end user satisfaction with services built on top of APIs.
By the way, I think that's close to a description. Was it Peastone?
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much what he was trying to do 20 years ago, perhaps just ahead of its time. That was the idea.
Bring it back. A slightly different take on this is I think that it still completely blows my mind the APIs that are out there now, right? That's like, I mean, you guys have customers, we have customers that do crazy things that are very AI driven. We have several bot companies like Pandora Bot, which will allow you to build little reasoning rule engines that you can just call by APIs and integrate those into some application. We have text analysis. We have a huge number of different processing services now, and you know there are probably 4 or 5 companies in the world that have these mega AI systems, so like IBM and Google and so forth. The APIs that are becoming available as a resource to build apps with are just mind-blowing. Like you could not take that stuff and run it in your data center. It would just blow your costs apart. So the creativity of the types of apps we can build now in terms of the intelligence of them, just because the APIs exist, is phenomenal. And I think that kind of playground of all those different options is kind of the next explosion of interesting stuff. And then it links even to data, right? If you've got data sitting in a data center, you don't need to send it out to get processed anymore. You can kind of pull these functions in and do things with it. So I think we're pretty early there. That'll be interesting. Until they all get switched off.
Other question here.
Picking up on Steve, your point about microservices and driving, increasing the number of APIs. I hear the questions sometimes from customers that say, help me design my backend services. Is there a one-to-one mapping between an API and a backend service? Or should I use service orchestration at the API level? Is there sort of some rule of thumb, some guidance that you give to customers?
Yeah, this is a great question. We get this a lot. So it's very tempting to, so you often have multiple layers in your architecture. You have an API gateway, you maybe have some transformation software, so Red Hat has Fuse, Tibco obviously has integration technology, and then you have your backend services, Java code or Ruby or whatever it is, right? So the question is, where do you do the work? And I mean, typically, and this is, at least for high volumes, you typically have facades at every level, right? So you've got redundancy, you can hit multiple backends from each of the ingress points. But you still have to answer the question, where are you going to do a certain transformation? A SOAP API into a REST API, or just add headers. And it is a tough call. It's very tempting to put them, early on, because you don't want the backend to be overloaded. But if you do that, then your gateways explode because you're doing something super complicated. We typically advise customers, and it's really to do with how much memory can you spare, and how deep in the stack you want a call to go, and how high volume those calls are. It's very difficult to give a generic answer, but I'm sure you guys see the same.
Yeah, and that's, I think in terms of the one-to-one mapping of what's on the back end and what API do we expose, one of the things that, I see a lot of people do that, they'll say, oh yeah, I'll just hook my ORM right to the REST call and we're done. The challenge with that is that for an easy-to-use API, what I want to do is step out of anybody who knows how it's built and talk to somebody who wants to build something with it, and then describe what are the objects, basically. I got and I always refer to the GitHub v3 API as really well done. It's got, it's clearly defined in terms of from the outside, what can I do with their site, and there's not any real smoking gun that points to the back end of a, wow, I feel like I'm building a SQL query in a query string. And that's how, for me, the real litmus test of, did you build a good API for me to use, or did you just wrap your SQL
So
backend?
another piece of really important wisdom is, and this is something that the AWS team does really well when they want to develop functionality, they go out and talk to customers, and they don't ask them, what feature do you want added to our SQL server? They say, what business problem are you trying to solve? And it's outcome oriented. So it's really important if you get into the API business, absolutely ask why does somebody want to use this? Not how can you conveniently bolt something on and bring it forward. Did you want to add anything?
No, play answer right. Think of from a consumption perspective. What is the use case? That'll give you the answer. Is one-to-one or not?
Good. I guess I will take that as the end. So thank you first, Tibco, for kindly hosting us, and we really appreciate it, and especially to our moderator Peter here, and Steven, Clay, and Sai for this excellent discussion tonight.
Yeah, and my particular thanks is it's really easy to be a successful moderator when you have thoughtful, deep experience as the panel. So made me look good. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.